Simon, how's it going, man?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all, mate. It's always good to get Australian projects on, and Loki's definitely an interesting one. One that I wish I looked more into. Just looking into it, preparing this interview, actually, it's very ambitious, and we'll get to that in just a bit first. But why don't you give us a little bit of your background? Tell us how you got into cryptocurrencies, and tell us a little bit about your story, mate.
I first got into cryptocurrency, and it must have been mid 2014, I want to say, or 2015. It was sometime after the Mt. Gox event and after the first major crash. Um, I was still in high school at the time, actually, I think, very, very late in the piece. And it was, at the time, me and a couple of my friends were looking at a lot of new technologies and getting very excited about them, or very scared in the case of AI and that sort of thing. And, we were just exploring a bunch of ideas and new stuff that was happening and getting very excited about the future, cliched though that is. Amongst one of them was cryptocurrency. Bitcoin was this huge thing with this huge cultural movement behind it that has sort of gone to the wayside these days. But, even back then there were very evangelical people. We really thought that this thing was going places. We thought that it was going to change the world. It may still do one day, especially if there's another big financial crisis. I think that's the real big test for cryptocurrency, to see what happens there. If it does get used on a fairly large scale, I think we can say that cryptocurrency was a successful experiment. But at the moment, we're very much still trying to figure it out. Anyway, I bought some Bitcoin. I think it was at 300 Australian dollars at the absolute bottom of that trough there, which is completely unintended. I don't remember exactly when that was, but it was a while ago now. And yeah, since then, I got involved in trading quite a bit. I did derivatives trading and bought a lot of altcoins and did all of that malarkey for about a year before I really started looking more deeply into the technology. Once I started doing that, it became a very interesting time. We looked at some things with payment channels, amongst other technologies. We had a brief period where Ethereum was the be all and end all, and I thought it was going to be everything. So yeah, I think I've been along with everyone else as far as the journey goes, just watching it. But as far as the actual development side of things go, I'd always been very skeptical of ICOs, especially as they started to ramp up. I think it was probably late 2016 is when we started to see them appear. And by 2017, they were so commonplace, it was ridiculous. So I became skeptical and a little bit irritated by a lot of the projects that were coming out. I wasn't very compelled by any particular one. And yet towards the end of 2017, I quit my job as an event manager at a university, and I started working in a blockchain co-working space here in Melbourne, just to tide me over for the time being until I figured out what I was going to do next. And there I met a lot of people, obviously being the pretty much the only co-working space in the world, as far as I can tell, with a significant number of people working in the same place that don't work for one company. It was very interesting, making some friends, and a lot of the people that I met there now work here at Loki with me, which is exciting. And yeah, so from there we always messed about with ideas. I mean, in a field like this, there's so much left to be done, so many ideas that have yet to be had. So we were playing around with a few ideas with education websites, payment companies, and other bits and pieces. And eventually we started this thing called Dollary Doos, which is a bit of a joke coin. It was a Bitcoin fork. So at this point, I'd gotten pretty interested in the actual technology itself, and I was starting to use some of the skills I developed earlier in my life with video game modding and some other bits and pieces to actually start to put together this technology and mess around with it a little bit. And so we launched this Bitcoin fork called $, which was pretty fun. And then around about the same time, an ERC20 token popped up of the same name, also a joke, similar concept. And being an ERC20 token, it was quite easy for people to get involved in that. So we let them run with that. But in this time, we actually came up with a number of ideas that we thought were quite interesting and quite compelling, and started to work through those over the course of several months. I wrote a brief paper on some ideas about using masternodes as a way to enforce off-chain behavior, which is really all Loki is. Loki is underwritten by this privacy currency. We aren't making any huge advances in that except with payment speed, but we're using that as a method to enforce off-chain behavior. And with off-chain behavior, you can do anything that already exists except you get a bunch of nice properties. So I'm sure we'll get to that. So that's sort of how I got into it all. That's sort of how Loki came to be. It didn't really kick off though until we got approached with some seed funding and some help with raising some more money, which was a fantastic opportunity. None of us wanted to say no to it. We did several rounds of negotiation to try and get something that we thought sat right with us. And eventually we launched our ICO in, I think it was very late February or early March. We actually kicked it off, and it lasted 18 days, only private, where there were no public contributions. The minimum contribution was $100,000 US. And yeah, I think it only took 18 days before we had nothing left. So quite successful, but also quite small. We weren't shooting for the stars. We were very conservative in our decision to raise $9 million US. I think we started with 15, realized that that was probably not necessary. So we were able to shrink our pre-mine by shrinking our raise, which is what we did. So yeah, that's sort of how it all kicked off.
Very interesting story, Simon. And, you know, as a side note, I don't think that's a bad thing, restricting a capital raise. I always put myself, if I was to launch an ICO, which I'm not going to, but if I ever was, I actually wouldn't want much, because I think the ICOs that tend to raise huge amounts of money have an enormous burden on their shoulders then to deliver. And quite frankly, are probably raising significantly more than what they need to actually develop and deliver a project. That's just to be quite frank. Now, before we get right into the technicals of Loki, I'm interested to know what your kind of value proposition, what did you see in cryptocurrencies that struck you? What was the thing that kind of sucked you in and said, you know, this technology's got something, this technology is going to be, you know, a mass adopted in the future? What was it about cryptos that grabbed you?
I think it was the possibility was what actually grabbed me at the time. Now I look at it a little bit differently, but at the time, it just seemed like so much was possible with this new technology. Maybe that's because I didn't really fully understand what it was for quite some time. But all of the new projects that were coming out and all of the new ideas and discussions, and of course that cultural thing I was talking about before, the cryptocurrency subculture has been running for, you know, the better part of a decade now. And this idea that we can take back the financial system and do something different that exists outside of the control of regulators and banks and so forth was a very compelling idea to me. We'd just come out of several years of struggle after the GFC, and not a lot was changed after that happened. So we're likely to see something like it again. I really think that, the cryptocurrency idea was compelling to me because I saw it as a potential solution to this. I look at it a bit differently now. I very much think that 90% of the projects out there have drastically overestimated the utility of blockchain technology, particularly those that are just using the token as a means of paying for a service. That's something that has been possible for a very long time. It doesn't require this technology whatsoever. And there are also a bunch of problems with things like dApps. We haven't actually seen any particularly useful or compelling dApps, for example. There's very little usage of most currencies, even Bitcoin, is not used all that often as an actual currency in the present state. One of the more compelling ideas to me was this idea that we can have this monetary system that exists outside of the current financial system. And I think even now, I think there is definitely utility in doing work to prepare for a circumstance in the world where that is not only possible, but desired by a large swath of people. At the moment, I don't see the demand, just because the current financial system, broken though it may be on a fundamental level, it is working fine at the moment, and it will probably continue to do so for some time yet. And it's going to be a very slow grind down if this happens. But if something like the US currency failing happens, that could be a huge catalyst. So that's the sort of very compelling thing to me. And one of the most important things about having this system that exists outside of the system is that it has to be private in a way that governments, banks, or just anyone on the street can't just read the exact state of everyone's money, which right now in Bitcoin, well, for the longest time in Bitcoin, that was exactly the case. And more recently, it's not that straightforward because a lot of wallets are generating unique addresses for single transactions, which is making things better, but it's still by no means perfect. Currencies like Monero were very, very compelling to me, and I got quite heavily involved in reading about it and getting involved in the community to an extent in 2017 when I met some people locally that were also very interested in these projects. The zero-knowledge projects, such as Zcash, are also very interesting, although I consider those as more as research projects right now rather than full-on cryptocurrencies that preserve those features, just because it's not by default at the moment. And that may change with Sapling. They may eventually switch it over so that it is not possible to not do a zero-knowledge transaction. But all of the adoption that they've gotten, all of the approval that they've got from various regulators and major bodies is mostly because 98% of the transactions are completely transparent. For all intents and purposes, it's a Bitcoin fork, so it's really not that different yet, but that may change. So privacy is probably the big one for me now.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, Zcash and Monero, sorry to interrupt you there, are definitely very interesting projects. I think anyone new to the space should look into projects that have been around for a while, and Zcash and Monero up there. Zcash is, you know, when you look at the development background of Zcash, when you look at the community, when you look at what they've achieved, you know, it's massive. And I think looking into those projects actually helps tell the story of cryptocurrency as well.
Absolutely.
So touching on the privacy features, that's kind of why I wanted to get a little bit of your background, because Loki's obviously a very privacy-focused project. So it's interesting to know your story, how you got into cryptocurrencies, and kind of the value prop that you saw. You talked about the GFC and you know, a potential upcoming financial collapse if one actually happens. I mean, really, who knows? But that side of things is certainly interesting to look at. So obviously, Loki, you know, you've developed your own protocol. Awesome project. What was the inspiration behind actually creating your own protocol?
When we were working more informally on the ideas, we were exploring how off-chain behavior enforcement could be used to create cyber attack resistant privacy networks or privacy features that didn't already exist on projects like Monero and Zcash. Now, I'm all for the open source community. I am certain that if the scope of the project was smaller, we would probably be able to get it funded as a Monero forum funding proposal and spend a year working on something of such a small scale. But it just seemed very, very implausible to me that Monero or any other major cryptocurrency project would convert their entire consensus system away from 100% proof of work into this Masternode hybrid system with all of these advanced features that were tangential to the purpose of Monero and other projects. So we decided that it would probably be best if we worked on something outside of that. I mean, we borrowed heavily from Monero. even today, we're merging upstream changes that they make, just because there are dozens and dozens of people working on Monero, looking at all of the problems, debating the issues, working out the best solutions to them, and then implementing them. I mean, we have our own problems. You know, we're not super well versed in the. I mean, we know what's going on, obviously, to quite a lengthy extent. But for example, we don't know the inner workings of bulletproofs. So we don't really have anything interesting to add or to say in that discussion, and we're more than happy to borrow from the Monero community their efforts in order to create something that we think has extended features beyond just a cryptocurrency. So that's really what we were looking at. The first thing we looked at was, okay, so if we can get this Masternode network that is inherently cyber attack resistant because of the market features that they have, could you create a decentralized messaging service that isn't peer-to-peer directly, because that you can link IP addresses very easily. For example, if I don't know if you know of an app called Wicker. It's quite popular here in Australia between friends trying to buy and sell drugs. Actually, every interesting privacy protocol that's been created and gets used started as a method of buying and selling drugs. As it seems. Same with Bitcoin. Yeah. But yeah, Wicker is interesting. It's end-to-end encrypted, but it is peer-to-peer, so it's a bit clunky, and you send messages directly over IP to the other user. And there's a few other applications like this. Tox is one of them. So when we look at the records of that, I can see that you directly connected to me. I know where you are located within, you know, quite a small geographic area. And depending on what you're doing, that can be quite dangerous or quite limiting for the privacy features that we're trying to achieve. So that was something we wanted to avoid. And the other thing we wanted to add was offline storage. So at the moment, if you use an app like WhatsApp, I'm not going to say Telegram. Telegram is the obvious example here for the cryptocurrency community because everyone uses it. But Telegram is rubbish. The encryption, they use some home-baked crap that is so far unverified by the cryptography community. So when you do a secret chat, I wouldn't trust the encryption. And when you don't do a secret chat, which is 99% of what people do, it's not encrypted at all. They store everything, maybe in plain text, maybe not, we don't know. But it's certainly stored in plain text on your phone and the other user's phone. So anything you do is completely visible. And you should assume that at some point, every message you ever send on that platform will be revealed. So it's not a good example. WhatsApp, on the other hand, is end-to-end encrypted. So only you and the other user can access it. It uses public key cryptography, which is very good, and the Diffie-Hellman key exchange to make sure that each message has a different key pair, which is another great feature. Perfect forwarded secrecy, deniable authentication, all that stuff. It's really good. Signal's the other one that is less popular. When you use that, you're relying on WhatsApp's servers and you're connecting to them directly. So again, you're storing a record of where you are on the internet and therefore where you are geographically. And there's a number of other issues there as well, such as linking your mobile phone number to your account, which is a huge identifying mark. If you require a mobile number in order to use the service, that's a large piece of metadata that gets leaked. And of course, you can get a private phone number, but it's hardly ideal. So these are a bunch of features that we wanted to get rid of. And we can do this through the Masternode system. So we can store messages offline on the Masternodes in their encrypted form temporarily. So I can leave my phone off, or I can be disconnected from the internet, and you can still send me a message and I can pick it up later, which is something that we've all come to expect from our messaging applications. When that doesn't happen, we get very frustrated and very annoyed. We can still retain privacy features throughout. And then as we kept going along, we were thinking, okay, so we can route messages through this system in a fairly anonymous way as far as the network side of things go. And then we were exploring using I2P or some other mixed net in order to make this network even more resistant. And as we kept going, we started meeting some people. One of the people that we met, his name is Jeff. He's been working on I2P for the last 3 years or something like that. And he started working on his own routing protocol that uses the best of I2P and the best of Tor. And we got chatting with him and we realized that it would be entirely possible and desirable to start our own mixnet. So that's the next big feature that came about. So we discovered that we could do this maybe 5 months ago now, and it's been a constant upward cycle from there. The scope of the project's greatly expanded, which is very, very exciting.
So how is the Loki Messenger now in terms of development? When do you think that this feature will actually be usable?
So we've been working on the Messenger recently. We've really only just started with porting over Signal. So we're relying on the Signal platform in order to create this Messenger. So Signal handles all of the encryption really well. The user interfaces are obviously not going to be perfect for our purposes, but they're in a fairly complete form. The cryptography is very, very heavily scrutinized and very, very well trusted, so we can also trust it. And now what we have to do is we have to rip out the back end. So we have to replace all of the server client stuff with LokiNet stuff. So we have to put all of the message storage has to sit on service nodes. All of the networking has to run through our routing protocol called LARP, which has to connect to LokiNet. And then that's all got to be gelled together nicely, audited, and then published. So that is looking faster than we expected. We said it would be the start of next year that this came out. It could be faster than that. It could be around that. It's really quite difficult to say at this moment because there's quite a lot of moving parts. So in order to have the system work, we need to have service nodes launched, which is happening on the 20th of September. We released the testnet a couple of weeks ago. Testing's been going very well. We've got a whole bunch of new features for that. Once service nodes are up, then we can put LokiNet on top of that. When that is going to happen is quite unclear at this stage, just because we're not certain about the number of features that we want to enable by default or enforce, and how that might all work as a user experience. And then we will plug in the Signal clone backend, mash that all together, and then the Messenger will come out. So there's a few different moving parts. It's kind of hard to say. If I had to put a guess on it, I'd probably say January would probably be my conservative estimate, but it may be sooner than that. It really just depends on how many features we want to put into the first version.
Okay, now this is probably a good lead into the snaps feature and the Masternode feature of Loki as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about those two things?
So the Masternode feature, I guess I'll start with. Our Masternode system, we call them service nodes because the nodes in question provide a number of services to users. They all provide the same service. Not only are they paid full nodes, which is typically all Masternodes are, but they are also they're full relays on a new mixnet. So with Tor, when you connect to the Tor network, you're relying on the goodwill of volunteers, or perhaps not so goodwill volunteers who are actually monitoring everything that is happening through their relay or their exit node to try and build traffic shade patterns. But anyway, that's another story. And essentially, they route packets around in such a way that when you connect to a website, that website doesn't know that you have connected to it. It's through a proxy. And every node in the three-step process, either they can know one of the following. They can know that you are connected to Tor, or that you are sending to a certain exit node, or the exit node can know that someone is requesting a web page, but they won't know who that person is, i.e. you. Mixnets have been around for, I think, over a decade now. So this is very well proven technology. And the snap part of it is where we can actually get two of these three-way hops talking to each other. So this means that I, as a website host, can connect to this mixnet and serve my content through a specific node. And then other people can come to what is called an endpoint within this network and connect to it, so they can then connect to me. Essentially what this means is websites can be hosted without the IP of the server ever being revealed. And so that's what we consider a snap. It's an internal service within LokiNet that preserves the server-side and client-side anonymity. So both users and the website are protected from ever knowing each other's destination on the internet. And that gives them a whole bunch of censorship resistance properties, gives them obviously a lot of privacy possibilities as well. Hidden services have been very popular on Tor for some time now. And with other planned integrations like a key management system, integrations of the Loki wallet, and the Messenger built right in, we expect Snap should become very powerful tools to create communities and marketplaces and other things online, other products and services which utilize these privacy-centric features to protect both the server and the client. So the possibilities here are really endless. And some of them, you can see examples of these sort of things working on other mixed nets and other protocols like BISC or OpenBazaar, but really nothing will compete with this as far as privacy goes.
I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball here. How are you going to ensure that malicious and inappropriate content isn't actually used on the network as a result of those privacy features?
As a function of its existence, there's no way of doing that. We have no control over that, which a lot of people credit privacy projects for this reason. By their very design, it's impossible to censor particular types of content, although some may consider that a desirable option. My view on this is that these tools already exist. It's already possible to serve these this type of content in an anonymous environment. It's just not been as well integrated before. We're not really doing anything new here or groundbreaking as far as either anonymous cryptocurrencies or anonymous internet access go. We're sort of creating a hybrid system that would bring some of that together. But yeah, it's a valid concern that malicious and nefarious people will use this. The other thing, though, to consider is Tor, the world's most used mixednet, is actually funded by the US government. I think it was the Navy that developed it, and there are a couple of other agencies now that give those guys $2 million a year to keep that service going. And the reason is because when they send operatives overseas, they actually to protect their anonymity in a public internet environment. Because they have no control over the source of the internet, they can make things significantly more secure for themselves by using these mixed nets. So it's not just criminals that find this stuff useful. It's actually journalists, governments, businesses, individuals, people in places where freedom of speech is frowned upon. Like, this is an incredibly important tool in the fight to keep democracy and freedom alive.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right about the US government. I believe they actually developed Tor and used it for a while themselves, and then they actually released it. They released it to the public. They open sourced it essentially. I'm not sure if they're still using it or not, but I believe that's a bit of the background behind it, which is interesting.
That's why they wouldn't be using it, given that they still fund it. The biggest contributor to the funding of the Tor Foundation, as far as I'm aware.
Interesting. So, touching on the hybrid point that you made before, you guys have gone for like a hybrid proof of work, proof of service model, I believe, if I got that correct. How does that actually work, and what was the driver behind using a hybrid model?
The driver behind using a hybrid model was that we'd seen it before, and we didn't particularly like proof of stake when we came up with the design. So we saw Dash, which is quite successful in proving a cyber attack resistant Masternode network could be possible. There are a number of other Masternode coins out there that have had varying degrees of success. Some have inflated themselves to death, and some are in the process of doing that. And all of these coins seem to rely on proof of work. And I think this is mostly because proof of stake is there are still a number of questions about it. There haven't been enough examples of it executed on a large enough scale to prove its viability. I'm leaning towards the idea that we should eventually move away from proof of work and go 100% proof of stake and change our proof of service into proof of stake. The distinction there is, yes, on Masternodes you're still staking coins, but you're not actually creating blocks. You're not collecting transactions, bundling them into blocks, and then getting other people to accept them and being rewarded from doing so. That would be the case in this system. So we would get rid of the proof of work put all of it into proof of stake and let the service node network actually run the entire blockchain. There are a number of risks associated with that, which is why we're not super gung-ho on doing that right now, and it's also unnecessary. The mining algorithm that we have at the moment, we think suits us fairly well. Mining is still very popular. It's quite secure. It's very well proven. So there's a bunch of considerations here. But I think, at the time, the reason we went with it in the beginning is because it was the most widely proven model of doing this proof of service correctly. So that's the reason. When we move to proof of stake, I have no idea. This is something I'm proposing personally. No one else in the office is really talking about it.
Oh, look,
I think it might be a year or two down the track.
Yeah, look, I love sitting on the sidelines and seeing the industry and the ecosystem develop and come up with new solutions like proof of stake and the different models coming from Ethereum. And, when you're looking at Plasma and you're looking at Casper, I think that's one of the most exciting parts about this industry, is seeing very smart people come up with very smart solutions to problems. And I think that's just one of the coolest things.
I think Ethereum follows more than they lead in that regard. Every major consensus upgrade they've ever proposed stems from someone else's discovery. I wouldn't give Ethereum too much credit. When they said they were going to do proof of stake, I think that was very much an interesting idea for them that they found compelling, but they were by no means the first people to come up with it. And they still haven't done it. So, they're always making steps. And Plasma is interesting as well. Plasma is kind of unique, I'll grant you that. But the Raiden network is definitely not unique. Lightning was in existence long before they were. But yeah, I think the community is probably, they probably tie in the most discussions and the most possibilities from around the cryptocurrency community into one project. They've always done that. They've always tried to be the most comprehensive and insane project out there. And I'm starting to see it become a little bit unwieldy. The stack of cards underneath is growing quite tall now. I think the 1.1 terabyte blockchain size is of a major concern for decentralization. I think that sooner or later, Ethereum will be run by under a dozen full nodes, and the rest will be just validating block headers, and sharding is not a solution to this either. There are some major concerns with the Ethereum project at this point, in my view.
Interesting stuff. Now, I just before we sort of look to finish up, I want to pick your brain on using the Cryptonite heavy hashing algorithm. I was just breezing through your white paper earlier, and I thought this was an interesting feature. So you guys have actually gone with correct me if I'm wrong, gone like a derivation of Monero's Kryptonite specifically to use something that is ASIC resistant, which is quite clever and forward thinking. So you're essentially trying to stop Bitmain and other ASIC hardware manufacturers from coming up with hardware that can essentially overmine your blockchain, which is really interesting stuff. So how does Cryptonite heavy differ from Monero's Kryptonite V7, which was in the white paper, and what will be Loki's strategy if ASICs are ever developed for the heavy?
Firstly, I'd be very surprised if ASICs ever were developed for heavy. We or one of our other heavy counterparts would have to become very, very successful for that to become even remotely profitable for ASIC manufacturers. So I don't see it happening in the next year or so, for example. Heavy is not really that different from Kryptonite V7 or the Kryptonite that came before it. It's the same ideas. They've just changed the parameters significantly enough that it's definitely not possible to mine Kryptonite heavy using current generation ASICs for Kryptonite or anything like that. And it's because they've increased the memory scratch pad, it is definitely going to be more expensive to develop another generation just to suit heavy. I think with the ASIC resistance game, given what we've seen with Equihash and Ethash as well, nothing is ASIC resistant forever. It's always possible to generate something unless we're talking about these newer ideas of polymorphic hashing algorithms such as PROG POW and RAND-PROG and some other things that we've been looking at, which are very interesting ideas if proof of work is the way to go. Like I said, I'm more interested in proof of stake personally, but no one has really chimed in on that yet, so we'll see how we go. And so, yeah, there's really not too much different. I think the thing that sets the big reason why we chose to not roll with V7, our initial intention was to roll with V7, but the major reason that we didn't is because Kryptonite Heavy has some of the advantages of ASIC mining without being ASICs. So what I mean by that is Kryptonite Heavy is a very small algorithm in the sea of fish that is mining algorithms. There are not many coins that use it, and the coins that do use it are quite small, ourselves included, which means that it is not a big target for ASIC manufacturers. The other interesting thing about Kryptonite Heavy is that more so than any other variants of Kryptonite, it favors AMD cards far more than you would otherwise expect. And what this means is AMD cards are more profitable to mine on this particular algorithm. So if you look at whattomine.com, you have, say, some NVIDIA 1080s or 1070s or something like that, and you look at the list of profitable coins, Loki isn't even near the top of the page. If you change it to AMD cards like a 580 or a Vega 56, we're very close to the top all of the time. And what this means is we get some of the advantages of having hardware that is specifically suited to one thing without that actually being the case. So one of the advantages of having ASICs is people make an investment in a specific type of hardware that can't be used for anything else. So it's against their interest to do anything to jeopardize those networks, because if they do, they're affecting profitability and therefore the return rate on their hardware. And the similar sort of situation exists here. AMD cards, there are a few other algorithms which suit it, but nothing like Kryptonite Heavy or Kryptonite, which make AMD cards particularly well suited. So people that do have AMD mining rigs are more incentivized to keep that smaller number of networks secure and not attack it. And the other reason we on 7 and we are on Heavy is because at the time NiceHash was very popular. There are a number of other Kryptonite forks getting absolutely slammed by orphan block attacks and timing attacks by people just renting a whole shitload of hashing power, dumping it all on Graft was the one that was taking a beating at the time, and then shifting it back over to Monero and then repeating that until they could abuse difficulty or they could create a bunch of orphan blocks and mine things really fast and basically 51% attack the thing. We went to Heavy because at the time a market didn't exist for that. A market does now exist for Kryptonite hashing, but it is so small. It's like a 10th or a third of our hashing rate at any given time, so we don't consider that much of a threat. But yeah, that's sort of the whole Kryptonite story as far as we are concerned. We didn't come up with Kryptonite Heavy is the other thing I should say. It was originally developed by the Sumo Coin team when they were one team. And then I think it was FireEye UK that actually developed it, I think. Anyway, yeah.
Very, very interesting stuff, Simon. Mate, we're going to look to wrap this up. Do you have anything, are there any developments for Loki that you want to share with people? Where can people learn more about Loki Network? Where can they follow you? And yeah, anything exciting or interesting on the horizon?
Yeah, so the website Loki.network is obviously the place to go if you want to know more about Loki. We launched our service node testnet recently. You should definitely jump on and see if you can get a test service node up and have a bit of fun with some of the command line stuff. We've created a few guides and tutorials if you're new to command line operations. Maybe it's a good way to get your feet wet. And if you want to join the discussion, the place where most of the discussion happens is at Discord. So if you go up on our website, you see socials at the top, click on Discord, and come join in the discussions. There's plenty of them.
Awesome. Well, guys, you'll find links in the description to everything Simon mentioned, so definitely make sure you go and check that out. Simon, thank you, mate, for your time. Very, very interesting chat, and all the best with the Loki project.
Thank you, Beau. Have a great day.
Cheers.
So I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Simon Harmon from Loki. Certainly a very interesting project. Just want to let you guys know that we are giving away a brand new Trezor white hardware wallet. If you want to enter the competition, all you have to do is visit the link down in the comments section, put in your details, hit submit, and then you'll go in the draw to win this brand new Trezor. Now, we're going to be drawing the winner on Sunday. The winner will be contacted by email to get their address details so we can actually send this Trezor to them. So guys, that's it for the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to leave us a like. If you haven't subscribed, make sure to press subscribe, come on board and join the Cryptocurrency Australia team.